I'd been in my new place in Savannah for maybe 2 weeks. Still had boxes unpacked. Still figuring out which nights the neighbors threw their porch lights on early, which ones stayed dark. The block was quiet in that old neighborhood way. Big trees leaning over cracked sidewalks, houses with deep porches, air heavy with the smell of damp wood and flowers. That Saturday was my first real day off in a while, and I decided to walk down toward the little corner store for coffee. About halfway there, I noticed a yard sale sign propped on the curb in front of one of the older houses. White paint peeling in sheets, big oak in the front yard draped in Spanish moss. The woman running it looked like she'd just moved in. Mid-30s, neat hair, simple dress, a folding table in front stacked with dishes, paperbacks, a few knickknacks. She told me almost right away, most of this was here when I bought the place. It was mostly odds and ends, nothing you'd stop for twice, until I saw the garment bag. It hung on the back of a dining chair, zipped almost all the way. When I slid it open, there it was, a vintage teal dress, 1950s cut, fitted waist, wide skirt. The fabric was soft, but substantial, like it had been made to last. She paused for a second when I held it up. "If it fits, she said finally, shrugging, but it didn't sound like she meant it. I didn't have enough cash on me, so I asked if she took Venmo. She said yes, and I sent the payment while she wrote my handle down on a scrap of paper. I walked home with the dress in its bag, still thinking about how well it had been kept compared to everything else on her tables. I hung it on my bedroom door and forgot about it for most of the day. That evening, just after sunset, there was a knock. When I opened the door, it was her. "Sorry, but I have to take that dress back," she said. I thought maybe she'd sold it to someone else earlier by mistake, so I asked why. She just repeated, "I have to take that dress back." Same tone, like that should be enough explanation. I told her I'd paid for it, I liked it, and I wasn't giving it back. She didn't argue. She just looked at my front door for a long few seconds, then turned and walked away. Over the next week, I started seeing her in places that didn't feel random. First, across the street from my work, leaning on the bus stop pole. Then, 2 days later, in the produce aisle at the grocery store, holding a tomato and not putting it in her cart. When I noticed her, she left without saying anything. Then came the first note. It was tucked under my windshield wiper after work. "Return it. You don't want what comes with it." Folded neatly, faint scent of dryer sheets clinging to the paper. 2 nights later, I came home late and went to hang my keys on the hook by the door. That's when I saw it. The dress was no longer hanging on my bedroom door. It was laid out flat on my bedspread, skirt spread like it was being measured. I hadn't touched it since bringing it home. The window latch in my bedroom was still in place, blinds down, but one corner was bent slightly, like someone had pulled them aside. On the floor near the foot of the bed was a bobby pin. I don't use bobby pins. I checked the rest of the apartment. Nothing else seemed moved, nothing taken. But that feeling that someone had been in here stuck like humidity. 2 days later, there was another note slipped into my mail slot. He watches the blue door. My apartment door is painted blue. The writing was identical to the first note. That's when I started keeping the chain on at night. I'd never bothered before. It felt like something people did in movies. Now it was part of my nightly routine. One afternoon, a neighbor from 2 doors down mentioned that the woman's house had history. The last tenant, she said, Had trouble with a man who wouldn't take no for an answer. She said it with a half smile, like it was gossip. I didn't smile back. It all came to a head the following Friday night. I'd just closed at work and was walking to my car in the dim lot. She was leaning against my driver's side door, arms crossed. "I'm asking you one last time," she said. "Give the dress back." When I told her no, she stepped forward just enough to close the space between us. "That dress makes you look like her. He'll think you're her." I pulled my phone out and hit record. A security guard was making his rounds, and when he saw us, he walked over. She didn't look at him, just kept her eyes on me. "I have to take that dress back," she said again, softer now before turning and walking away. That night, I called the police. I showed them the notes, the video, told them about finding the dress moved inside my apartment. They suggested I get a temporary protective order and told me to call 911 if she came back. The next morning, I sealed the dress in a box, taped it shut, and left it at a friend's house. I didn't tell her the full story, just said it was safer there for now. For a while, things were quiet. I changed my route to work, started taking different streets home, added extra locks to my windows. Then, 2 weeks later, I noticed a man across the street from my building. Standing still, hands in his pockets, looking in my direction. He stayed there maybe 30 seconds, then walked away. Could have been waiting for someone. Could have been nothing. But I stayed inside until he was gone. That night, I pulled the blinds all the way shut and double-checked the chain before bed. I kept picturing that box at my friend's house and wondering if she'd opened it. I haven't seen the woman in months. But sometimes when I walk home from work, I feel that same prickling awareness I felt in the parking lot that night. It's not constant. It's just enough to remind me. Sometimes I think I should have given the dress back. Then I remember the way she looked at my blinds that first night, counting them like she wanted to know how many were between her and whatever she was after. I don't wear teal anymore. I've been retired from my shop for a couple years now. I still tinker in the garage, but nothing like before, just enough to keep my hands busy. Last summer, I decided it was time to thin out the tool collection. My back isn't what it used to be, and most of the heavier stuff just sat there gathering dust. I set up a couple folding tables in the driveway, priced everything fair: sockets, wrenches, an old torque wrench with a sticky dial. I knew what each piece was worth. I'd use them all. Mid-morning, a guy who looked to be in his late 30s pulls up. Jeans, faded t-shirt, the kind of haircut you give yourself in the mirror. Seemed normal enough. He picked through the sets with interest, asked about storage cabinets I wasn't selling, complimented how clean the floor was. Paid cash for a red metal toolbox and the set inside it. He even asked for a receipt, said it was for his records. I wrote one out, figuring he was just particular. While we were talking, he asked what hours I'm usually in the garage, smiled when he said it, like it was just curiosity. I laughed it off, told him I was retired, so I'm in and out. He nodded like he was filing it away. That evening, just before dusk, I heard the crunch of tires in the driveway. It was him again. Said he'd forgotten to ask if I had any spare metric sockets. I told him I could check tomorrow. He stepped half a foot inside the garage without asking, eyes roaming over the tool chests I hadn't put out for sale. The next night, he showed up again. Same time, maybe a little later. This time with a pack of cigarettes in his shirt pocket. Offered me one. I don't smoke, told him that. He asked again about what else I might be willing to part with, eyes drifting toward my bigger rolling chest. I kept my answers short. Night 3, I didn't hear a knock. I just happened to look out the front window and saw him standing by the mailbox at the edge of my property, smoking. My motion light in the driveway clicked on. When I stepped outside, he said he was waiting on a ride. The next morning, after a light rain, I noticed footprints near the shed where I keep scrap metal. The padlock had fresh nicks around the clasp. Nothing missing, but I didn't like it. That evening, an orange extension cord I kept coiled by the garage door was gone. Not worth much, but I'd just used it the week before. Could have been misplaced, but I keep track of my gear. I started parking my truck inside at night, nose against the garage door so it couldn't be rolled up without moving the vehicle first. I also started locking the side door from the garage to the kitchen, something I'd never bothered with before. A couple nights later, close to midnight, I was in the living room when I heard a metallic clink from outside. Not loud, but not the kind of sound that comes from wind. I hit the garage opener from the bedroom remote and walked toward it before it was all the way up. The sudden lift caught him mid-step, halfway between my truck and the rolling toolbox. He had a cigarette in his mouth, not lit. He froze for a second, then gave me a shrug. Thought I'd check if you'd made up your mind about that scrap. I told him I wasn't selling anything else. He smiled, said, "Didn't think you'd mind me looking." I said I did mind, and that I was calling the police. He walked to the curb like he had nowhere better to be. I stayed in the driveway until he was gone. The officers came, took a statement, drove around but didn't find him. They told me to call again if he showed up. I added a heavy-duty bar lock to the garage door and hung a bell from the shed latch so I'd hear it if it moved. For a while, nothing happened. Then one morning I spotted a cigarette butt pressed into the dirt along the north fence. Same brand he smoked. That side of the property backs onto a narrow strip of grass between fences. No one should be there. Weeks passed. I started keeping a small notebook on the workbench, logging what I noticed. Dates, times, anything out of place. Not because the police asked, but because I wanted a record. One cool evening in September, I was sitting on the porch and saw a shadow by the mailbox. Not close enough to see details, but the way he stood, weight on one hip, arms loose, looked exactly like him. He didn't come up the drive, just stood there a while, then walked off. I never saw him again after that, at least not up close. But I still keep that notebook in the garage, and the bell on the shed, and my chair angled toward the driveway when I sit outside at night. My wife jokes that I'm guarding the concrete. Maybe I am. It's easier to sleep when you can see the space between you and the street. Most mornings, I'm the one pushing the stroller. My wife teaches at the community college, so I've got the early shift, snacks, naps, and a daily walk to keep our daughter from climbing the walls. One May morning in Flagstaff, the sky was clear, air dry, and the pine smell was strong enough to notice even over my iced coffee. We were on our way toward the dog park loop. I had no real plan, just walking the long way to burn off some energy. Then I saw a small yard sale. One folding table, a few plastic bins, an older woman in a camp chair with a paperback. She looked up as we passed and gave me that little nod, the kind that says, "You can look if you want." Most of it was the usual: books, blankets, chipped plates. But off to the side, on a dining chair, sat a porcelain doll. Pale face, chipped cheek, button eyes, dressed with tiny stitches and yellowed lace. It looked like something from another time. "That one wasn't supposed to be out," the woman said, standing. Then she added, "It belonged to someone I knew." "I'll pay whatever you want," I said. She studied me, then asked where I lived. I mentioned we were near the dog park and the school with the blue mural. She nodded like she was placing it on a map. While I counted cash, she asked my daughter's age. Twice. I put the doll in the stroller basket and headed home. At home, I set the doll on the low bookshelf in the living room, telling myself I'd move it later. The blinds in that room always tilt down in the afternoon, though one slat never lines up right. That night, around 9:15, there was a knock. 2 light taps. The woman stood on the porch, same skirt, cardigan over it. "I need the doll back," she said. "It wasn't meant for you." I told her we could talk in the morning. My daughter was asleep. "I'll come back," she said, and left. I went to get the doll so I could put it away. It wasn't on the bookshelf. I checked the coffee table, under the couch, the toy bin. Nothing. 10 minutes later, another knock, softer. "I just need it back," she said through the door. Then, "Do you live alone? What time do you usually use the yard?" I told her to leave. She waited a moment, then walked away. The next morning, I avoided her street and took the long way to the grocery store. At the park, a neighbor mentioned a woman had asked what time the toddlers usually come out. When we got home, there was a note under the mailbox flag. "Found something that belongs to me. I'll come by later." The handwriting matched her yard sale price tags. By afternoon, I still couldn't find the doll. I checked the whole house again. Under furniture and closets, still no doll. At pickup time, my wife went instead. While she was gone, the porch cam pinged 3 times. 2 were nothing. The third clip showed the woman standing on the sidewalk, looking straight at our house. That evening, she knocked again. I told her I couldn't find the doll. This time, she didn't mention it. Instead, she asked, "Is anyone else here at night? What time do you put the little one down?" "Please leave," I said. She looked at the baby shoes by the door before walking away. I called the non-emergency line and asked how trespass warnings work. At 10:30 p.m., a car idled at the end of the block. Then my side yard camera pinged. The feed showed her near the fence, looking at my daughter's tricycle. "I've called the police," I said through the cracked door. "I'm not leaving without what's mine," she answered, still looking at the tricycle. "If you mean the doll, it's not here." "I know," she said. She stepped back and left through the side gate. Police arrived minutes later. I showed them the mailbox note and the camera clips. They went to her house. She told them she was recovering property. I showed my Venmo receipt for the doll. They told her to stay away. After they left, I found the doll half under the couch. I bagged it and dropped it at the station the next morning, asking them to hold it as disputed property. We changed things. New blinds, extra latches, no more posting photos of our daughter online. A week later, I saw a sedan behind me on the way home from the store. Could have been anyone. I took a detour anyway. She never came back, at least not that I saw. But when the porch cam pings after dark, I still stop what I'm doing to check. I'm not sure the doll was ever the point. I was walking Murphy, my 90-pound mutt, down our usual route when I spotted it. A big, sturdy gas grill sitting at the edge of a driveway 2 streets over. Kansas City in July means yard sales are everywhere. But this one looked like a jackpot for someone like me. I'd been looking for a decent grill for months, but everything new was way out of my budget. This one had that well-seasoned look, stainless steel still in good shape, the kind of thing you just can't fake. The guy selling it, Evan, looked to be in his late 40s. Ball cap, worn jeans, a sun-creased face that smiled too easily. He waved me over like we were old friends, even though I'd never seen him before in my life. "You a grill guy?" he asked, patting the lid like it was a family pet. I said yeah, and asked how much. We haggled for maybe 30 seconds before he named a price that felt like robbery in my favor. I handed him cash without hesitation. Since I was walking the dog, I told him I couldn't carry it home, and he offered to deliver it later. That meant giving him my address. I hesitated for maybe half a second, just enough for Murphy to sniff at a tipped-over folding chair, before dismissing the thought. It's a yard sale, I told myself. It's what people do. Evan loaded the grill into the back of his beat-up Ford Ranger and said he'd bring it by before dinner. Sure enough, around 6 p.m., he backed into my driveway and wheeled it into place on the patio. We shook hands, I thanked him, and he left. Easy. Or so I thought. At 10:45 that night, late enough that I was already in bed, Murphy barked, loud. A second later, I heard a knock at the front door. I threw on a t-shirt and went to check. There was Evan, holding a small metal rack. "Forgot to give you this," he said, grinning. "Fits right inside. Warms the buns." It was odd, sure, but I took it. Thanked him again, and he left without further small talk. The next evening, around 9:30, another knock. Evan again. This time he held up a folded, grease-stained pamphlet. "Found the manual," he said. "Thought you might want it." I took it, said thanks, but he didn't leave right away. He lingered on the porch, looking over my shoulder like he was trying to see into the living room. Murphy was pressed against my leg, with a low growl rumbling in his chest. Finally, I stepped half inside and said, "Well, I appreciate it." That seemed to break the spell. He nodded and walked off. By the third night, I was already telling myself this was getting strange. At 8:50 p.m., the knock came again. Evans stood there empty-handed. "Just wanted to check if the igniter's working," he said. "It's fine," I answered quickly. He nodded, then smiled. "You keep your back gate locked?" "Just wondering. Makes it easier to wheel it around if you don't." That comment stuck with me after he left. 3 nights later, I woke to Murphy growling again. The digital clock read 3:02 a.m. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the feed from my new backdoor camera, a cheap one I'd bought a few months back to keep an eye on raccoons. And there he was. Evan, standing at the back gate, one hand on the latch, fumbling with something. Maybe a key, maybe a tool. He kept looking toward the house. I called 911. The dispatcher told me to stay inside and keep the dog with me. By the time the cruiser rolled up, Evan was gone. But the wet grass showed where someone had stood, and the gate latch was scratched like it had been worked at with metal. Police found him 2 blocks over, walking along with his hands in his pockets. When they questioned him, he told them he just wanted to see if the grill was working okay. They gave him a trespass warning, but no charges. That was 4 years ago. The grill is still out on the patio, covered and unused. I can't bring myself to cook on it. Now I've got motion lights front and back, a taller lock on the gate, and Murphy sleeps in my room every night. Sometimes I still see a Ranger like his pass by slow. And even though it's probably just another truck, I find myself holding my breath until it's gone. I keep thinking that giving him my address over a casual yard sale was the most expensive mistake I've ever made. Winters in Fargo will take the fight out of you if you let them. I've lived here long enough to know that a good coat is less about looking nice and more about survival. By January 2005, mine had been through 6 winters and was starting to feel thin in all the wrong places. One Saturday morning, I stopped by a yard sale in my neighborhood. Not a big setup, just a couple of folding tables in a garage, some boxes on the driveway. The kind of sale people hold when they want to clear out whatever's been taking up space too long. A family was running it, bundled up against the cold, their breath visible every time they spoke. They had a rack of winter clothes near the back of the garage, mostly old ski jackets and wool sweaters. That's where I saw a heavy parka, thick enough to stop wind dead, dark green with a fur-lined hood. It had a few scuffs, but nothing serious. "How much for the coat?" I asked. The man looked at the woman, then said, $10. I pulled a bill from my wallet, handed it over, and walked out wearing it. No small talk, no story, just a straightforward purchase. When I got home, I tossed the coat onto the chair by the back door and went about my day. That night, before heading out to the shop, I slipped it on again and noticed something in the left inner pocket. It was stiff, rectangular. I pulled it out, a brown leather wallet, worn soft at the edges. Inside was an ID, a couple of faded receipts, and a photo of a man in his late 30s. I stared at the name on the ID for a second because it felt familiar. Then it hit me. A year ago, his face had been on a missing person poster at the gas station near my work. The kind you see taped to a door and then forget, until you don't. I set the wallet on my workbench, not sure what to do next. My first instinct was to wash my hands, not from fear, just because it felt like handling someone else's life. The next morning, I called the non-emergency police line. They sent an officer over, who took the wallet and the coat, asked where I'd bought it, and took my name and number. He said someone from investigations would follow up. After he left, I stuck a yellow sticky note to the empty nail where I'd hung the coat. Just the date and a quick note. Parka and police. I don't know why. Maybe to remind myself it had been real. 2 days later, the phone rang at the shop. The voice on the other end didn't say who they were, just, "You're the guy who bought the green coat?" "Yes," I said slowly. "Did you keep anything else from it?" "No." Silence. Then, "You'd tell me if you did." Before I could answer, they hung up. That night, as I was locking up, I noticed a sedan idling across the street with its lights off. Could have been waiting for someone in the apartments, but it stayed there until I turned the key in the shop door. When I looked again, it was gone. The next day, I went back to the family who'd sold me the coat. I told them what I'd found and asked if they remembered where it had come from. They both shook their heads. The man said they'd bought a storage unit at auction and had just been selling whatever was inside. When I mentioned the name on the ID, the woman went pale. "We've never seen that coat before," she said, which didn't make sense given they'd sold it to me. I didn't push. A week went by without hearing from the police. I figured maybe it was one of those things that would fade into the background until I got home one night and found my back door not fully latched. I always double-check that door. I pull on it twice after locking to make sure it's set. This time, it opened with just a push. Inside, nothing was missing. Nothing moved. But the sticky note from the nail by the back door was gone. The next morning, I called the detective whose card the responding officer had left me. He said they were looking into some things and would stop by. When I asked about the coat, he said it had been sent for processing. When I asked about the man whose ID was inside, he just said the case was active and couldn't share more. That night, the sedan was back. Same spot across the street from the shop, lights off. This time I just stood in the doorway and stared until it drove away. A couple of days later, a different officer came by the shop. He said they were trying to trace where the coat had been before the storage unit. I told him about the phone call and the car. He wrote it down, but didn't say much. Sometimes these things get tangled, he said. Like that was supposed to make sense. Weeks passed. It was still freezing outside, and I bought another coat. Not as heavy, but good enough to get me through. I hung it on the same nail and put a new sticky note above it with the date. A dumb habit, but it felt like keeping a record of myself. The sedan didn't come back. Not that I saw. No more strange calls. But I kept noticing little things. The chain on my front gate was looped different than I leave it. A box in my garage was moved a few inches. Small things that don't mean much until you start keeping score. One afternoon in March, the detective called. Said they'd been able to connect some dots using the wallet, but couldn't give details. He thanked me for calling it in, said I'd done the right thing. After we hung up, I stood by the back door looking at the nail where the new coat hung. For the first time, I considered taking it down. Not because of the weather, because of the feeling that once something's been on that nail, it's part of whatever story is playing out. Even now, every so often when I'm locking up at night, a car will slow down as it passes. Could be nothing. Probably is. But I wait in the doorway until it's gone before I finish turning the key. And I keep the sticky notes. Not because they mean anything to anyone else, but because they remind me there are gaps in the story I was part of. Gaps I'm not sure I want filled. If these yard sale nightmares made you second-guess strangers, good. Hit that like button, subscribe for more horror stories, and tell me in the comments which story got under your skin. And if you think danger only lurks in sketchy places, you've got homework. Click now to watch 4 disturbing suburban horror stories, because safety is sometimes the scariest illusion. Stay alert, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next nightmare.